There's a lot more people here than I was expecting. I didn't even expect half these people to come.
We are so grateful for Joseph's maturity, how he is somebody that he's tasked and just does them. He has a lot of initiative, he has a lot of diligence, he has a lot of self-control, and I think Joseph's going to do great at Alert.
I know a lot of people have gone through, they say, oh, you can do it, but I'm probably just going to have to experience it to see if I really can make it.
The emails between Josh Duggar and Michelle Duggar from Washington County Detention Center reveal something that nobody who has followed this family publicly would have predicted: a fundamental and revealing disagreement between Jim Bob and Michelle about how to handle their son's conviction. And what emerges from reading Michelle's communications is a portrait of a woman who appears to genuinely believe in Josh's innocence in a way that Jim Bob privately does not. And the contrast between how these two parents communicate with their imprisoned son tells you more about the internal dynamics of this family than almost anything else in these 350 pages. Michelle's approach to communicating with Josh is to send him messages from fans and extended family members who are defending him and declaring him innocent. And on December 29th of 2021, she forwarded him a letter from a fan named Elizabeth Jones, who wrote that she had never missed an episode of the show for almost 20 years, that she had been setting people straight on Facebook when they repeated what she called untruths about the family, that she believed Josh had been sabotaged, and that while he had made some bad decisions at 14 and again a few years ago, he had repented, and that was between him and his wife and family. And Josh responded with genuine gratitude, saying it was very encouraging and precious. And what this exchange reveals is the machinery of how the Duggar public narrative operates. Because Jim Bob knows privately that Josh is guilty, he has told Josh as much in his own emails, but publicly he is allowing and encouraging the circulation of a narrative that Josh is innocent, and loyal fans who have parasocial relationships with the family from decades of watching them on television feel called to defend that narrative. And Michelle is collecting and forwarding those defenses to Josh in detention as a form of emotional support, which means Michelle is actively participating in perpetuating a false public narrative even while the private reality is something entirely different. Michelle's January 2nd email to Josh is almost entirely scripture, a long hymn about the depth of God's love and the promise of divine pardon, regardless of what a person has done. And while there is nothing inherently wrong with a mother sending her son scripture, there is something deeply revealing about the choice of that particular message at that particular moment. Because the subtext is that no matter what Josh has done, God has already forgiven him and his wounds have paid the ransom. And this is the theological framework that allows the IBLP world to process child sexual abuse as a spiritual matter requiring forgiveness rather than a criminal matter requiring accountability. And Michelle, sending this to Josh in the days after his conviction, is either genuine comfort from a mother who loves her son, or it is the theological justification for never holding him truly accountable. And from reading these emails, it appears to be both simultaneously. The contrast between how Michelle and Jim Bob communicate with Josh is stark and revealing. While Jim Bob's emails tend to focus on what he is doing, what property he is managing, what his other sons are accomplishing, what events are happening that Josh is missing, essentially a parade of things Josh is excluded from while sitting in detention. Michelle's emails are warmer and more emotionally engaged. She sends photos, she shares small family moments. And in April of 2022, she wrote Josh a message telling him that one of the children caught a Luna moth, that Jim Bob bought a long golf cart and the children were taking rides in the yard, that they had homemade chicken soup and cheddar biscuits at Resurrection Sunday lunch. And then she wrote, and this is the line that stops you cold, "You are a good husband and dad, Josh. Your wife and children love you." And those words directed at a man who is sitting in detention after being convicted of possessing child sexual abuse material tell you everything about Michelle Duggar's capacity for reality when it comes to her children. Because calling Josh Duggar a good dad from a detention visitation screen is not love, it is delusion. And it is the same delusion that allowed her to raise a household where these patterns developed and were never genuinely addressed. The Mother's Day exchange between Michelle and Josh is one of the most humanly bizarre sections of these entire 350 pages. Michelle reaches out to ask Josh what he would like to give Anna for Mother's Day. Josh asks for tulips and Reese's cups and says he just realized Mother's Day was that weekend and he is kind of tied up, Michelle orders the tulips and the Reese's cups and gets the children mochas and fresh berries to give Anna. Josh writes Anna a message through Michelle saying she brings so much joy, peace, and hope to their family. And the entire exchange is presented as a normal, loving family moment, when the reality is that Josh Duggar is communicating with his wife through his mother from a county detention center where he is awaiting sentencing for a federal conviction. The Father's Day message Michelle sent to Josh is perhaps the most disturbing single document in all of her emails. She wrote that he had impacted his children's lives in more ways than he would ever know, that he was a man who had worked hard to provide for his family and point them to the love of God, that he had led his family in prayer and created strong memories, that some of the strongest family ties are formed in earnest and humble prayer, that he was a loving and patient man with patience and kindness as strong qualities, that he had sought to humble himself before God and before others, and apologized when needed, and extended grace when others messed up. And this message was written to a man convicted of possessing child sexual abuse material, a man whose children were told by his own sentence that he could not be around them unsupervised. And Michelle writing these words is not a mother comforting her son. It is a mother who has so completely surrendered her own moral judgment to a religious framework that she cannot access genuine accountability even when it is desperately needed. And the danger of that is not just for Josh, but for every child in that family's orbit. Because a grandmother who calls Josh a good dad is a grandmother who will tell his children he is a good dad and will frame his conviction as an injustice rather than a consequence. The letters written to the judge asking for leniency at Josh's sentencing reveal something significant about the internal Duggar family dynamics. Michelle wrote a letter, Anna wrote a letter, a neighbor named Nicole Burris wrote a letter, David Waller wrote a letter, and a city council member of Tontitown named Tim Burris wrote a letter. And that last name on the list is one of the most disturbing details in this entire document, because it demonstrates exactly why accountability has been so elusive in this community. A sitting city council member of the town where the Duggar family lives writing a letter of support for a man convicted of possessing child sexual abuse material tells you that the Duggar family's influence extends into the local government in ways that directly affect how law enforcement and local officials respond to anything involving this family. And if you have ever wondered why Tontitown seems to protect the Duggars, at every turn this letter is a significant part of your answer. But the most significant absence in that stack of letters is Jim Bob Duggar. He did not write one, and that absence speaks louder than anything he could have written, because Jim Bob spent years publicly defending Josh, publicly calling him a changed man, publicly framing what Josh did as a stumbling block that had been addressed through prayer and counseling. And then when his son needed a letter written to a federal judge making the case for leniency, Jim Bob Duggar wrote nothing. And the only explanation that makes sense given everything in these emails is that Jim Bob privately knew the evidence was overwhelming, privately knew Josh was guilty, and could not bring himself to put his name on a document asserting innocence because the legal consequences of making materially false statements to a federal court were too significant even for Jim Bob Duggar to risk. The cousin Janice emails that Michelle forwarded to Josh after his sentencing are another example of the propaganda ecosystem that Jim Bob has built and maintains. Cousin Janice wrote that she did not think the trial was fair and was not convinced the verdict was correct, that she had been appalled by things Amy Duggar and Deanna Duggar had been posting on Facebook, that family members should not turn on each other, and that she stood behind the family in prayer, and Josh forwarded this to Michelle as encouragement. And what this reveals is a network of extended family and community members who have been so thoroughly shaped by the Duggar public narrative that they are criticizing the women who are speaking truth about this family. Amy Duggar and Deanna Duggar, who have both been financially and personally victimized by Jim Bob's control, while defending a convicted predator, and they are doing this not because they have access to the evidence or have thought critically about what Josh did, but because Jim Bob has managed the information they receive so effectively that they genuinely believe Josh was sabotaged by a biased justice system. Now I want to address something broader that these emails illuminate about the IBLP belief system and why it produces the outcomes it does, because understanding this is essential to understanding why generation after generation of this family keeps finding itself in the same cycles. The IBLP framework takes away personal agency entirely. It tells people that having an identity outside of God is selfish, that having opinions, thoughts, and feelings is selfishness, and giving in to the things of this world. It tells them that all problem solving should be directed toward God rather than toward practical human action. It does not tell them to go to therapy, does not tell them to get educated, does not tell them to take the classes that a court might require, does not tell them to hold each other accountable in direct, honest human terms, and instead replaces all of that with an endless loop of scripture recitation and prayer and radical forgiveness that conveniently absolves everyone of the need to actually change. And what you see in these emails between Josh and Michelle is two people who do not know how to have a genuine human conversation with each other, because they have both been trained since birth to process every experience through a biblical framework that was never designed to handle the realities of criminal conviction, child sexual abuse, and family dysfunction on this scale. Michelle's final email to Josh before she apparently stopped writing, a Father's Day message calling him a loving, patient man who had set a good example for his children, combined with the fact that she wrote a letter of support to the judge while Jim Bob did not, combined with the fan emails she forwarded him, combined with the Mother's Day tulips and Reese's cups she bought on his behalf, creates a picture of a woman who has made her peace with her son's guilt by simply not allowing it to be real in her emotional and spiritual world. And that is not Christianity. That is not faith. That is a coping mechanism that protects Michelle from having to feel the full weight of what has happened in her family. And it does so at the expense of every victim, every child, and every person who has been harmed by the system she helped build and has never taken genuine responsibility for. And the tragedy is that Michelle Duggar is in many ways also a product of that same system, also someone who is shaped by Jim Bob's control and the IBLP's framework into a person who cannot access her own judgment independently of what that system tells her to think and feel. And by the time you reach the end of these emails, what you are left with is not anger at Michelle Duggar, but something closer to grief. Grief for who she might have been if anyone had ever told her that she was allowed to think for herself, and grief for the children who deserved a mother who could.